Well, the governor plans on tackling health care, climate crisis in his new state budget proposal. But this morning, we want to focus on his plan for California schools. I know so many parents want to know more about where this money is going to go. And joining us now, Troy Flint from the California School Boards Association. Troy, good morning to you. Thanks for coming on the show.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
So we've had a chance to look at some of the funding here when it comes to schools. I know you've been going through it with a fine-tooth comb here. What are your thoughts on the governor's plan specifically for the money that's earmarked for education?
We appreciate that the governor has identified a lot of the issues that are really pressing for California public schools, has given a substantial amount of money toward those schools. Overall, it's a positive budget for education. Our only quibble would be that we think it's important that schools at the local level have money to spend at their discretion for the specific needs in their local communities and not be restricted by one-size-fits-all generic programs for which they may not qualify or which may not make the most sense for their particular kids.
Well, I know your organization has been working on a funding initiative the past couple of years. Are you still pursuing this full and fair funding plan? Can you explain what that is and whether you think the governor's budget addresses that?
At one time, we were contemplating a ballot measure that would raise revenue for California schools and move us from around 40th in the nation in terms of per pupil funding up into the top 10. We are no longer pursuing that ballot measure, but we are still intensely committed to the idea of raising the student funding levels in California schools, and we're going to pursue that through different means.
So legislation, as you know, is being considered right now to fund schools based on student enrollment instead of the average daily attendance. How does that change the funding for schools, and what are your thoughts on this proposal at this point?
So the vast majority of states in America fund schools based on the number of students. In California and maybe 6 or 7 other states, you fund schools based on the number of students and the days that they attend. So if you have a 95% attendance rate in your student body, you only get 95% of what your total allotment would be. Obviously, that results in less money for schools, and it means less services for students, and it punishes those students who are going to school on a regular basis. So we're very interested in this enrollment proposal, but it obviously depends on the details. So as the language gets hashed out, we'll take an official position.
I know some districts are concerned because the attendance numbers over the past 2 years have been frozen with the whole pandemic and everything. But we have seen a decline in public schools, and those numbers, those true numbers, are going to come to light here soon and could have an impact on some of the funding that districts get, right? Do you understand why some districts may be concerned about the attendance levels that have been dropping?
Absolutely. Attendance or enrollment in California schools has been declining even before the pandemic for the first time in our state's history. Obviously, the pandemic has accelerated that. So there's been a lot of concern around this issue. And the governor in his budget proposal is talking about letting some of the years outside the pandemic be included in the calculation for the enrollment and for the amount of money that schools ultimately receive. And that's an effort to try and soften the blow of this sharp enrollment cliff that schools have been seeing the past couple of years.
A lot of reasons that we are hearing the decline of enrollment, people moving out of California, kids moving into private schools. I mean, what are some of the reasons behind this consistent decline?
So there's some demographic factors. You have an aging population. Immigration has slowed, which has been the major source of population gain in California for quite a while. You do have an acceleration of people moving out of state, and then you have more parents choosing to homeschool and a slight uptick in private school attendance as well. So it's a combination of all those factors.
So there's some legislators out there saying that they have funded schools at record levels and that schools have enough money. Do you think schools have enough money to operate at this point?
For the long term, no. Right now, schools have received a very welcome infusion of cash, and it has been a significant amount of money. But most of this cash is one-time funds. And they've been using these relief funds to staff up, to add extra programs and services. And when that money runs out in the next year or so, they're going to have to find a way to pay for all those programs, services, and staff they added. And there's not enough money for that. So where we're headed is for going over a cliff into major layoffs, potentially programmatic shutdowns, and school closures if we don't find a way to maintain what we're doing. When COVID ends, the problems caused by COVID are still going to be with us, and we don't have the funds to address those properly.
So the only solution then to use more taxpayers' dollars to put into our schools, is that the only solution in your eyes?
I think we need to combine higher revenue with being smarter with the money we have and a top-down evaluation of what's happening at the state level, and then also what's happening at the local level to make sure those funds are being used responsibly and that they're being targeted to the students who are in need. But it's a two-part problem. You need to have more money, and you need to use the money in a more practical, responsible way. And that's how we'll get to the place where we're offering high quality education for all students.
Look, we've heard from some parents that aren't seeing much of a change at schools when it comes to COVID safety measures, yet school districts receive millions of dollars in COVID funding. Do you think school districts have done a good job managing those funds?
I think given the constraints they're working under, which are massive, that school districts have tried to move mountains. But like other institutions across the country, they're suffering from the same issues of supply chain problems, logistics, finding enough staffing to even keep schools open has become a challenge. And so they're just working against very difficult circumstances, trying to manage a public health problem when they're not public health institutions. They're working very far out of their scope. And given what they're up against, I think that they're doing admirably.
Okay, we only got about a minute left here, but the State Teachers Union says they remain committed to keeping schools open for in-person teaching and learning, but to do so, they say schools must have proper safety measures, access to testing, adequate staffing. Do you fully expect schools to remain open here, Troy?
I think most schools will remain open over the holiday. All the unions, including the teacher union that you mentioned, as well as the education management organizations like CSBA, which I represent, combined with the governor's office to issue a statement affirming or reaffirming our commitment to keeping campuses open and kids in the classroom. There are some schools now which are just approaching the breaking point because staffing shortages are so great. Many districts are over 20% daily absences. That's probably going to climb you up into 30-40% as we continue to see a peak in COVID in some areas. And at that point, staying open is unsustainable. But I think everybody's on the same page that closing schools, even temporarily now, is a last resort. And when that happens, it'll be because schools had no other options. So it's very different than, say, the winter or spring of 2020.
All right, Troy Flint from the California School Boards Association. Thanks so much for the conversation here this morning.
Thank you.